Today, inshallah, the Imam is going to talk to us about the first night in the grave. All praise is due to Allah. We seek His help and forgiveness. We seek refuge with Him from the evils of ourselves and the evils of our deeds. O you who have believed, fear Allah as He should be feared, and do not die except as Muslims. Servants of Allah, Allah the Exalted says in His magnificent book, "And you have certainly come to us alone, or individually, as we created you the first time, and you have left whatever we bestowed upon you behind you." There are 2 nights in which every Muslim should frequently put them in his thoughts. A night he spends in his family, a night he spends in his house together with his children and family members in happiness, comfort, health and well-being, laughing and joking. Also, imagine the other night that follows the previous night of joy, and the angel of death comes to you to take your life. Then you are put in the grave alone and lonely. Someone might say, when I went to a place I wasn't used to, I had a sleepless night. What do you think if that night was your first night in the grave, where there is no companion, wife, children, or wealth? Allah says, then they are returned to Allah, their true Lord. Unquestionably, His is the judgment, and He is the swiftest of those who take account. First night in the grave. Scholars have cried about this day. Wise people complained about it, and a lot of books were authored on it. A poet was brought while in his final moments of life after being bitten by a snake during the journey. He forgot to say goodbye to his mother, father, children, and siblings. He said, just before he parted this life, "How do I leave my children at this moment? Why didn't I take permission from my parents? Is that how life is taken? Is that how it perishes? Is that how I lose everything at once?" My associates and handlers of my funeral say, "Don't go far away, O our beloved." But is there any place farther than the grave? Is there any place scarier than the grave? Is there any place darker than the grave? Allah says in the Quran, "Until when death comes to one of them, he says, O my Lord, send me back to life, in order that I may work righteousness in the things I neglected." By no means. It is but a word he says, and behind them is a barrier until the day they are resurrected. It will be said to such people mentioned in the above verse, "Is it now that you are viewing your records? Is it now that you are repenting? Is it now that you are abstaining from sins? O you who turns away from mosques, O you who abandons the Quran, O you who trespasses the boundaries set by Allah, are you repenting now? Where were you before now?" O Muslims, I request myself and you to lighten up our graves on the first night, and nothing lightens the graves except pious deeds after being faithful. The Prophet ﷺ went out heading to Tabuk in a foray. In one of the nights he slept, and his companions, Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu said, "I looked at the messenger's bed, and he was not in bed. I then placed my palm on his bed, and it was cold. I went to Abu Bakr's bed, and I couldn't find him. I turned to Umar's bed, and I could not find him." He said, "Then there was light at the end of the camp by a tent, so I went to that light. There was a dark grave, and the messenger was descended into the grave. It was a funeral, and a dead body covered in shroud and Abu Bakr and Umar were present, the Messenger saying to them, "Loan to me your friend." After descending the body, the Messenger rested him finally in the grave. Then his precious eyes were in tears. He then faced the Qibla and raised his hands and said, "O Lord, I spent the day being pleased with him. O Allah, be pleased with him." Ibn Mas'ud said, I said, "Who is this?" They said, "It's your brother Abdullah ibn Bijadain. He died last night." Ibn Mas'ud said, "By Allah, I wished I was the dead person." Umar ibn Abdul Aziz used to be a prince in the Umayyad Caliphate. He used to change clothes more than once per day. He was in possession of gold and silver. He had slaves and castles. Whatever he wished of food and drink were constantly available at his disposal. When he became the Khalifa and became responsible for the affairs of Muslims, he left all the lavish life because he remembered the first day in his grave. He stood on the podium and cried on a Friday after the Ummah elected him to be the leader. Around him were ministers, princes, scholars, poets, and commanders. He then said, "Take away your allegiance." So said, "We don't want except you." They said, "We don't want except you." Then he accepted it forcefully. Before a week passes by, he became feeble and weak. His skin tone changed. He didn't have except one cloth. They said to his wife, "What's wrong with Umar?" She said, "By Allah, he does not sleep at night. By Allah, he goes to bed, but he would be rolling as if he were sleeping on amber. He says, 'Oh, I have assumed the leadership of the nation of Muhammad ﷺ. The poor and less privileged would ask me on the day of resurrection. So also children and widows.' Then one of the scholars said to him, 'O leader of the faithful, we saw you when you were in Mecca before you assumed leadership in enjoyment and you were healthy and hearty. What's the matter with you now? You changed.' He cried heavily, then said to the scholar, 'What do you think, O Ibn Ziyad, if you see me in the grave after 3 days? The day I would be stripped off my clothes. The day I would have pillows from soil. The day I would leave behind friends and loved ones. What do you think if you see me after 3 days? By Allah, you would see something you wouldn't like.' And finally, brothers and sisters in faith, your mother had given birth to you crying, and people were around you joyously laughing. Then we should work for your own self to be, when they cry on the day you die, you should be laughing and you should be happy. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actualize that for us all. May Allah the Exalted grant us good end and resurrect us among the pious ones. Wa subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika